Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report. Make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, be sure to follow me on social media at P.A.S. Report and share this episode with 3 to 4 other people you know. A lot going on out there. Friday, there was a brouhaha over a tweet that Trump put out there on Truth Social. It was a video about election integrity, and this is going to be an episode on election integrity. But at the end of the clip, there was a 2-second picture of former President Obama, Michelle Obama, as monkeys. It was part of a broader clip, Lion King, that made fun of Democrats, and Trump was the king of the jungle. But like everything else, it blew up. Now, the video, it should be condemned. It was totally unnecessary. Obviously, this was an auto clip. And the fact of the matter is that President Trump did come out. He did condemn the video, but you gotta be careful when you are in the public eye. You gotta make sure that what you're putting out there is accurate, that what you're putting out there is responsible. It was completely irresponsible. The fact of the matter is they should have watched the video, whether it was Trump or one of his staffers. They should have watched it fully, and they should have clipped that last 2 seconds out. Could have avoided this whole thing. So that's just sheer stupidity. Before I get to the election integrity issue, I've been going through some of the Epstein documents. There's a lot of troubling stuff there. Again, everyone's going to see what they want to see in this. I think the one thing that's clear, and obviously I haven't even scratched the surface. There's so many damn documents. But the one thing that's clear is there were a lot of people that knew exactly what Epstein was doing. And they remained quiet. They said nothing because they're cowards, they're frauds. And I'm not talking about the ones that even engaged in the grotesque acts. I'm talking about people that just associated with him. It reminds me of Harvey Weinstein, where it was like the worst kept secret in Hollywood. This was one of the worst kept secrets in politics. And Epstein's ties to intel agencies, that's another fascinating thing that I still have to explore more. But for this episode, I want to start by asking a simple question. If non-citizens get all the benefits of citizenship without being a citizen, we're talking about representation, we're talking about welfare, housing, Medicare, and even voting, then what exactly is the point of citizenship? I mean, when it comes to elections, what exactly are we voting for? Because that's what this episode and the debate is really about. Not race, not suppression, not history. It's about secure elections and citizenship. We are talking about the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act has exposed something devious in American politics. There are so many people in positions of power who are openly resistant to the idea that voting should be limited to eligible citizens and that we need to secure our elections. They always downplay the potential vulnerabilities in our election system, the safest elections ever, the most secure elections. And then you have others who just shrug and say, fraud, it's not a big deal. Doesn't happen in large numbers, not enough to overturn an election. It's all nonsense. But the louder the opposition screams, the more obvious it becomes that this isn't about protecting voters. It's about protecting a system that no longer wants clear rules or clear lines, a system where the very thing that links us together as Americans, citizenship, it's treated as if it no longer matters. But citizenship does matter because it's the foundation of consent and self-government. It's what gives the system its legitimacy. And here's the reality. Over 80% of Americans, 80% support voter ID. That's not a Republican number. That's not a conservative number. That's an overwhelming bipartisan consensus. When you have support of that magnitude, it's cutting across all party demographics, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, progressives, conservatives, non-affiliated voters, cuts across everything. And yet Washington treats voter ID and election integrity as some radical proposal or as if it's not something worth fighting for. Why? Because it's clear. It is clear. Too many in power don't care about election integrity. And then there are those who actually see it as a threat to their political power. So let's slow this down for a minute. Talk about what the SAVE Act actually does, not what the Democrats say it does, not the media caricature of it. And I think The most important change is that right now in far too many states, voter registration relies on attestation. That means that you check a box, sign a form, and swear under the penalty of perjury that you're a U.S. citizen. That's it. Once you attest, there's no follow-ups to make sure that you're telling the truth, no documentation, no verification, just your word. So the SAVE Act actually closes that loophole. It shifts the system from trusting claims to actually verifying eligibility. It requires documented proof of citizenship when registering to vote in federal elections. That's not an extreme thing. That is basic governance. The American people deserve confidence in their elections. Think about how most first world countries have strict voter ID laws, with the exception of Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. 3 countries, that's it. You even have countries like Mexico and Brazil. They have some of the world's robust voter ID systems to try and prevent fraud. We're not talking about countries that are like right-wing dystopias here. In fact, most are far more progressive than the United States. But somehow we're going to pretend it's not good enough for the United States. And forget voting for a second. Every serious system works this way. There's always verification on anything, whether it's banking, employment, travel, government benefits. They all require verification. But somehow when it comes to voting, we're told verification is dangerous, that verification will disenfranchise people. That should raise alarm bells because it's a massive red flag. Why would anyone oppose verification unless it served their own interest? Maybe the chaos and the lack of enforcement is exactly what they want. Then you have to look at the voter rolls, because I don't think people realize how screwed up our election system is. Our voter rolls are a mess, and the vulnerabilities are impossible to ignore. You have this SAVE Act that requires states to remove non-citizens from voter rolls, and they have to maintain up-to-date, accurate lists. Who's going to argue with that? Non-citizens shouldn't be on the voter rolls in the first place. Imaginary people shouldn't be on the voter rolls. And you have these opponents, the people that oppose the SAVE Act, they immediately scream that you're trying to purge the voter rolls, as if this is some nefarious plot. But honestly, I don't even think it goes far enough. Anyone who has died or moved out of the jurisdiction should be removed from the voter rolls. That's not controversial. That's simply common sense. And to those on the left, instead of screaming racism, let's try and act like adults for a moment, because we already know how to do this. This isn't hard. We do it every single day. When someone dies, Social Security is notified almost immediately. Payments are shut off, and it doesn't take months. It doesn't take years. In days, the payments get shut off. When someone goes to jail, the system updates. Benefits change. Status changes. Records change. We have a federal government that's capable of tracking income and employment, incarceration, death, benefits in near real time. A government capable of collecting every single piece of metadata from its citizens. The idea that voter rolls must remain frozen in time because updating them is just simply too hard or too complicated, it's absurd. We're told that cleaning rolls is a threat to democracy. No. The truth is that unsecure elections are a threat to our republic. And with today's technology, there's no reason, none, no excuses. When someone dies, moves, convicted of a disqualifying crime, the Board of Elections should be immediately notified, and that voter should be removed from the rolls after confirmation. This isn't a question of technology. The tech already exists. It's already there. And the SAVE Act would even provide funding for the tech upgrades that it would be necessary. So the truth is that this is a choice. This is a choice they're making not to clean the voter rolls. And what is the benefit of keeping ineligible voters on the voter rolls? What's the benefit of that? We have to ask the obvious question. Who benefits from keeping ineligible people on the voter rolls? Who benefits from that? It's not us. It's not the law-abiding lawful voters. It isn't citizens who want elections that clearly reflect the will of the eligible voters. And if it's so easy to fix, why don't they want to fix it? Why are they fighting so hard against fixing it? And then you have the most dishonest talking points you'll hear about the SAVE Act, that it's going to nationalize our elections. That is flatly false. It's a lie. The SAVE Act doesn't take control of elections away from the states. States would still decide ballot access rules. They would still run elections. They would still handle ballot design, voting procedures, voting locations, vote counting, certification. Nothing changes there. What the federal government sets, just as it has done in the past, is eligibility standards for federal elections. That's not new. That's constitutional. Setting eligibility rules is not the same as running elections. Anyone telling you otherwise is either lying or they're deliberately trying to confuse and scare Americans, because the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed in cases like Foster versus Love that Congress has the explicit power to ensure uniform standards in federal elections. So if enforcing citizenship and voter requirements equals nationalizing elections, then the Constitution is in violation of itself. But guess what? Most of these people that make the rules don't even know the Constitution. They've never even read it. But the fight matters. This isn't about suppressing voters. It's about restoring trust. It's about legitimacy. It's about whether Americans still believe the system is capable of enforcing its own rules. A month ago, I talked about the new contract with America, and in part 3, I explained how important election integrity is, about the consent of the people, the idea that self-government only works when people believe the process is fair and the rules are applied evenly. You cannot have consent of the people if you can't run a secure election. And you can't have a secure election when basic eligibility standards are treated as if they're optional. That's the foundation of this entire debate. And look, I'm not going to pretend that the SAVE Act doesn't add inconvenience. Yes, you'd have to find that birth certificate or passport the next time you register or move. But in a world where we're forced to jump through bureaucratic hoops for everything, from a building permit to a fishing license to a hunting license, why is this the one loophole that the left finds acceptable? Why? I mean, not for nothing. You've already shown those papers to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get your real ID. They verified you, they scanned the documents, but because of a lack of political will, that data stays locked in a DMV system. How's about we connect those systems directly to the Board of Elections? I know, it's a pretty novel concept, right? If this is so common sense, why are Democrats screaming Jim Crow 2.0? They want the inconvenience, so they scream voter suppression. It's the ultimate gaslight. They break the system, and then they tell you that fixing it makes you a racist. And when we come back from a quick break, we're going to talk about the man leading that gaslighting campaign, Chuck Schumer. Why is he so terrified of a secure ballot? So everyone, hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So before we go any further, I want you to hear this for yourself, because this is Chuck Schumer claiming the SAVE Act is Jim Crow 2.0.
We've got to get this done, and we've got to get it done very quickly. The SAVE Act is an abomination. It's Jim Crow 2.0 across the country. We are going to do everything we can to stop it.
Now let that sit for a second. According to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the Democratic leadership, requiring ID to vote is racist. It's designed to suppress black voters and minorities. That's the claim he is making. And notice, he never explains how it suppresses the vote. He just uses the Jim Crow brand because it's a shortcut. It shuts down the brain. You don't have to debate when it's all about racism. He wants you to react with emotion so you don't look at the actual data. But if that claim is true, if the claim is true that minorities are unable to get ID, that it would infringe on minority rights, wouldn't that show up in real life? Because it should be obvious. It should be reflected in how people actually live, which brings me to another clip I want you to hear. Ami Horowitz went out. It was phenomenal. He did man on the street interview, just talking to ordinary people. I know that's something radical, right? Talk to ordinary people. And he asked questions on the street to real people. So first, he asked progressive white liberals why they think voter ID is bad for black Americans. Listen carefully to what these people had to say.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs, you do over the internet, Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works.
A lot of people have smartphones, but you might not have data.
For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed.
I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the African Americans.
You can't make this stuff up. According to these virtue signaling, Moria superior, latte sipping progressives, black Americans don't know where DMV is. They don't have access to the internet. They don't understand how the internet works. They don't have smartphones or data plans. They don't know what's out there. And apparently can't vote because they're all convicted felons. Does that sound like concern to you? Does that sound like compassion to you? This is the racism of low expectations. Notice something important. Not one of these people said, I asked black voters what they think. Not one. They didn't cite any data. They didn't cite any experience. They spoke for an entire group of people as if they were helpless children. And I will guarantee you that every single one of these people has a college degree. They believe that they are educated, and they constantly mock and make fun of the uneducated. This is what progressivism looks like in practice. It's a belief system where white elites appoint themselves the voices of minorities and assume the absolute worst about the minorities, about their intelligence, their competence, their independence. And the irony, these are the same people who tell you they're anti-racist. These are the same people who will quickly label you as a racist if you dissent from their narrow-minded point of view. Now, here's the best part Democrats don't want you to hear. Ami Horowitz then went to Harlem and asked black Americans the same questions, same issue, same claim, same assumptions. Listen to what they had to say.
Now I'm here in East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. That's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
What is this, some type of trick candy camera?
I know, right?
That's the only thing I brought with me.
Those are legit IDs. And I also heard a lot that black people, especially poor black people, have no access to the internet, can't figure out how to use the internet.
That's just stupidity, honestly. Everybody has access to the internet. Even a little kid can figure out how to work the internet.
I had access to the internet for years.
You know how to use it properly, right?
Exactly. I do it at work. So, of course, I know how to use it. My kids know how to use it. They all have iPads, iPods, whatever.
Your phone has data?
Mm-hmm.
You can actually
unlimited.
Unlimited data.
Mm-hmm. I use my phone as a hotspot.
What does that say to you for the people who have this perception of black people?
They're pretty much ignorant. That's what my thought process was.
I just think that's ignorant. Ignorant.
Ignorant. That's the word I'm hearing a lot.
Ignorant.
So every single black person he interviewed had ID. Every single person knew how to use the internet. Every single person knew where the DMV was. There was no confusion, no helplessness. Not a single one of them made themselves out to be a victim. They were adults just living their lives like every other normal person, regardless of color. And I want to pause here for a moment because this matters to me personally. I want to give a shout out to Barbara from Harlem. Barbara was a friend. She'd been on the podcast a few times before. She's the author of Escaping the Racism of Low Expectations. She passed away a few years ago, sadly, and the world is a worse place without her because she was sharp as a whip. She was someone who was thoughtful, independent. She was politically aware. Barbara didn't need a Chuck Schumer speaking for her. She didn't need white progressives explaining her limitations. She didn't need anyone lowering expectations on her behalf. See, Barbara understood exactly what today's progressives are all about. She knew that the help offered by these elites was actually a shackle. It was a way to keep people dependent on the system, on the government, that views them as nothing more than stats as opposed to citizens. And she would have laughed out loud at the idea that she couldn't figure out how to get an ID or use the internet. That's the part that should make everyone angry. The Democratic argument isn't insulting because it's wrong. It's insulting because it's rooted in a deeply racist worldview, a worldview where minorities are useful symbols but never treated as equals. It reminds me of the Democratic Party going back to their roots, right? Believing that black people couldn't have their freedom because they weren't smart enough to survive on their own. They needed their white masters. And I understand why Malcolm X warned about the progressives. But the kicker is polling that shows 76% of black voters and 82% of Latino voters support voter ID laws. So let's be clear about what's happening here. Democratic leaders are ignoring the actual views of minority voters. They're claiming to protect them, but they're ignoring them. Progressive whites want to project their own ignorance, their own arrogance onto entire communities. And anyone who pushes back on these progressives, they get accused of racism. Well, were all those black people in that video, were they all racist? Were they the black faces of white supremacy? See, what we're talking, it's not about civil rights. Democrats, it's about political manipulation. And let's be honest here, if Chuck Schumer were right, voting would be the least of their problems. If people couldn't use ID, because the people he's describing wouldn't be able to drive, they couldn't rent an apartment, they couldn't open a bank account, they couldn't enter a federal building, they couldn't fly on a plane, they couldn't apply for benefits, they couldn't survive modern life. They wouldn't even be able to buy over-the-counter cold medications. That would be a real national crisis. But that's not reality. The truth is minorities are just as capable as their white counterparts. And in Ami's interviews, which he did a fantastic job, you see competent adults rejecting the narrative imposed on them by elites who need a victim class to justify their power, who need a victim class to make themselves feel good, that they're the moral holy warriors of the 21st century. Is this why the SAVE Act scares people like Chuck Schumer and Senator Chris Murphy? Because it forces Democrats to choose between reality and rhetoric? But the Democrats aren't the only ones that have a problem. We have a problem on the Republican side as well. And when we get back from a quick break, we're going to talk about why Republicans, despite having overwhelming public support in this issue, why they are still finding ways to lose the fight. Because remember, incompetence isn't limited to one political party. So everyone, hang tight and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now it's time to take a look at the Republican Party because at some point voters have to ask themselves a very basic question. What is the Republican Party actually good for? What is it good for? You have a majority in the House, you have a majority in the Senate, you have the presidency, and yes, I recognize it's not a supermajority in the Senate, so I understand that. But what have they done? Because if you can't pass a bill supported by 83% of the American people, this isn't a messaging problem. It's not a timing problem. It's not a math problem. It's a leadership problem. I want you to listen to this clip from Senator John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, explaining why the SAVE Act may not even get to the floor for a vote.
Right. Well, I guess, and I would just remind people that the coin in the realm in the Senate is floor time. There's a finite amount of it, and we have a lot of things we have to do. There's a housing bill that's awaiting action, hopefully a market structure bill, possibly permitting reform, farm bill, highway bill. You can go right down the list. Russia sanctions, there are a whole bunch of things that could be teed up for action on the floor of the Senate. And so you have to make some judgments, and the conference will have a conversation about that. I've committed to that we will talk about that idea and determine whether or not what the conference's views are about it and how they want to proceed. As I said, we will vote on the SAVE Act, but exercising or triggering a talking filibuster has ramifications, implications that I think everybody needs to be aware of. So we will have those discussions, but that's obviously ties the floor up for an indefinite amount of time with not only unlimited debate, but also unlimited amendments.
There it is. I mean, you've heard versions of these excuses before, right? There's not enough time. We don't have the votes. We can't hit 60. We don't want to change Senate norms. I'll translate that for you. It means don't expect anything to happen. And let's start with the obvious here. The SAVE Act is not controversial with the public. As I keep on reiterating throughout the episode, 83% of Americans support voter ID. When you're talking about margins that large, this is no longer a partisan issue. This is a consensus. This should be a layup for Republicans. They support cleaning the voter rolls, getting rid of the people that have died, the people that have moved, the legal immigrants, getting them all off the voter rolls. People support that. So when John Thune says he doesn't have the votes, he's not talking about the American people. He's talking about, the few members of his own caucus who are more afraid of a mean tweet or headline from the New York Times than they are of failing their constituents, because they fail their constituents time and time again. And yet Republican leadership, they want to act as if this is some fringe idea that needs to be handled delicately, that it has to be, we have to be careful and quiet about it, and preferably we never handle it at all. And that should infuriate every Republican voter. And I'm not just talking about Republicans. I'm talking about a lot of independent people who vote Republican. Part of the problem that the Republican Party has is that over the years, they constantly promise all these things, and then they never commit to those promises once they get in office. And so a lot of independents who would vote Republican, they have just disengaged from the political process. This is the political party that campaigns on election integrity. It fundraises on election integrity. It warns about election integrity. And then when it's time to legislate, suddenly we're told, you don't understand. You're too stupid to understand. It's complicated. It's hard. If Republicans can't get this done, they don't deserve to survive as a political party. And I want to hit on the 60-vote threshold, because that's what would be needed to break the filibuster. We have to deal with the filibuster excuse, because this is where things get deliberately misleading. People like myself aren't asking the majority leader to nuke the filibuster. We are not calling for an end to unlimited debate. I do not believe the Senate should become like the House. It's supposed to be the more deliberative body. And yes, I recognize there are some Republicans that want to totally do away with the filibuster. But what I want to be absolutely clear on is that I am talking about the zombie filibuster. This is not a founding era tradition. This is a procedural gimmick that emerged in the 1970s, where senators no longer have to hold the floor in order to have endless debate and delay or kill a bill. The zombie filibuster, you don't have to have a debate. You don't have to defend your position publicly. They just threaten a filibuster and everything stops. No speeches, no stamina, no accountability. That's not debate. That's veto power without having to take any responsibility whatsoever. And here's the part Republican leadership never wants to admit. The zombie filibuster doesn't protect minority rights. It protects senators from having to take hard votes. It allows them to avoid any accountability while they pretend that they're defending Senate traditions. Now, if Democrats had the votes and wanted this bill, I can tell you now the zombie filibuster would be gone. It would be gone. We've seen it already. Judges, executive appointments, Democrats like to carve out these exceptions whenever power demands it. In fact, many Democrats have already warned that once they regain power, which sooner or later they will, the filibuster is gone entirely. Not just the zombie filibuster, the talking filibuster too. So when Republicans say their hands are tied, what they're really saying is they don't want to fight. Just look at the whole redistricting going on in Virginia. Indiana Republicans said, well, we don't want to gerrymander because we don't want to start a gerrymandering war where they're going to box out Republicans. So the Indiana Republicans said, we're not going to gerrymander. And then what's the first thing they did in Virginia when Abigail Spanberger was elected as governor? The first thing, redistricting. Taking a state that is pretty much 50-50, maybe 55-45 Republicans. You have 11 congressional districts, and now they just proposed redistricting where 10 of those districts will be run by Democrats, 1 by a Republican, essentially eliminating 5 Republican seats. Meanwhile, the American people are stuck watching a political class that refuses to act even when there's overwhelming agreement. And we've seen this movie before. I think that's what makes it so frustrating to me. You know, as someone who does vote Republican, I think I'm politically homeless. I don't really believe any political party really has my views in a sense. Both them operate almost as a uniparty. But I think Republican voters are tired of being told to wait, tired of being promised action in the next session, Tired of watching leadership flinch every time Democrats accuse them of racism or extremism. I mean, at some point, enough with the excuses. Like Republican version of negotiating with Democrats, Democrats will be like, we want $100 billion for climate change. Republicans will be like, we'll give you $98 billion. Deal. And that's Republicans' version of negotiating. It's so frustrating to watch. I mean, think back to Obamacare. Republicans ran for years on repeal and replace. They won the House on that message. Then they said, well, we got the House, but we need the Senate. And then they won the Senate. And then they said, well, we have the House, we have the Senate, now we need the White House. And then they won the White House. And what happened? What happened then? Nothing. Nothing. No replacement plan, no serious reform, simply excuses. We saw the same thing with FISA. Republicans raged about Russiagate and the abuses of power, how the FBI targeted President Trump and how they lied to the FISA court. And what did they do? What did they do? They reauthorized FISA with no meaningful reforms whatsoever, no accountability, no consequences. They campaigned against weaponized government. What do? They expand it. They campaign on limited government. Then government grows. They campaign on fiscal responsibility. Then budgets explode. Look at what happened with Doge. Elon Musk and Doge team identified billions of dollars in waste. Billions of dollars. And Republican leadership has a difficult time codifying $9 billion of the hundreds of billions of dollars in waste. If they are this terrified of cutting a few $1 billion from a $6.8 trillion budget, maybe it's no wonder they're terrified of secure elections. I don't know. It's like a disease, right? A lack of political courage. They talk about getting rid of the pork, then they put tons of earmarks in the bills for their pet projects. They still continue to fund corrupt federal entities like the National Endowment for Democracy. So it seems that whenever Republicans are in charge, the budget, the debt, the size and scope of government continues to grow. Is it really any different than when Democrats are in charge? And this brings me to the most serious, important part, because here's the danger Republicans aren't taking seriously. Most Republican voters and independents that lean Republican, they've had it. They've had it. They're done. They're tired of the broken promises. They're tired of these officials saying one thing as they're campaigning and then doing the exact opposite once they get into Washington. They're tired of being told to wait. I don't think the Republican caucus realizes the backlash they will face if they cannot get voter ID and the SAVE Act passed. It's going to be ugly because it will be seen as the ultimate betrayal. It's the final nail in the coffin. The average Republican voter is tired of the excuses. If they can't deliver on something this basic, this popular, and this defensible, how many Republican voters will just stay home during the midterms, all but guaranteeing a blue wave? And the reality is that a lot of people vote Republican not because they love the candidates or the Republican Party itself. They vote Republican because they view it as a lesser of two evils. Disillusioned voters don't switch sides. They just stop voting. They stop showing up. And if Republicans think that they could scare people into voting for them simply because they're not as crazy as Democrats, they are in for a rude awakening in the midterm elections. If Republicans want support and trust, they need to earn it. All right, I get compromise is part of the system. I am a conservative. I understand that I only make up about 30% of people in the Republican Party with a similar ideology that I have. So I understand that I'm not going to get what I want 100% of the time. I understand that I'm going to have to work it out and compromise. And I don't expect perfection. But if you can't pass a bill supported by 83% of the American people, and you want to sit there and hide behind some procedural invention from the 1970s, not even from the early 1800s, then the problem isn't with the Democratic Party. The problem is with the Republican Party. Because at the end of the day, the SAVE Act isn't just a piece of legislation. It's about whether the word citizen still carries weight in this country, whether it still means anything. It's about whether we're a nation of laws or a nation of loopholes. We've seen the gaslighting from the left. We've seen the cowardice from the Republican leadership in the right. But they only get away with it when we stay quiet. They count on you becoming disillusioned from the system. It's why so many people today say, what's the point of voting? My vote doesn't matter. Stop giving them that satisfaction. Now, if you found this episode informative, if you found value in it, I have two specific missions for you today. First, call Senator Thune's office, 224-2321. 202-224-2321. Tell his staff that 83% of the American people are done with the excuses. Tell them that if leadership isn't willing to fight for the basic standard of documentary proof of citizenship when we vote, then they've abandoned the very concept of consent of the governed. Make it clear that you expect the SAVE Act on the floor for a vote. No more stalling. So call his office, 202-224-2321. The second mission is to share this episode with exactly 3 people. Send it to a friend who is tired of the excuses. Send it to a neighbor who doesn't even know what the SAVE Act is. And most importantly, send it to someone who is already disengaged from the political process because they need to become informed. They need to get engaged again. We need people informed. We need them engaged. We need them focused on the mission of restoring our republic. We are being gaslit by the left, sidelined by the right, and the only way to break free from that cycle is to empower our fellow Americans with the facts. Now, as always, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your commitment to this great nation.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.